there is a group of importers of farm shrimps that is called the Asian Farm Shrimp Supply Chain Roundtable. And what this coalition wanted to do was to help sending the message about landscape-based management and aquaculture improvement projects. And so it's thanks to them, it's thanks to these companies that we are running these webinars. And also, if anyone in this session is interested in learning more about the supply chain roundtable, please let me know, drop me a message, and we can send it to the web page or answer any questions. Right, without further ado, I would like then to introduce the chairman of the supply chain roundtable, William, who's here today and is going to tell us why this work is so important for aquaculture sustainability. So welcome, William.
Thank you, Elena, and welcome to all. It's great to see you all here for the third one in our series. Within the roundtable, we look at all aspects of AIP and the environmental aspects of shrimp, and we also look at how we can, and it's one of our objectives towards making it more acceptable in sourcing strategies and adopted within a market. And one of the things we've seen in terms of a barrier is that people are concerned about traceability, and they can see certified product and certified farm at a farm level as a way of traceability. But we wanted to put this topic together, demystifying aquaculture traceability through supply chains and how AIPs can increase supply chain transparency. And I like to look at that also in terms of consideration for wild supply chains as well. In wild supply chains, FIPs or fishery improvement programs have been around a little bit longer and a bit more known concept than AIPs. And within that, we can see aspects of traceability and acceptance within sourcing policies. For example, maybe in a fishery with lots of small scale boats, it can be considered acceptable to have it back to a batch of boats rather than definitive back to individual vessels. And the batching of a group from an accepted bit of a group of boats could be similar to a group of farms that are achieving environmental objectives within an AIP. So I've got two great presentations today from Roy and Cormac. Roy is going to kick us off. Roy works for the ASC. He's been there for the last 5 years, working on improver programs, and he also addresses issues in shrimp supply, beyond specific farm certification. Previous to working for the ASC, he was with IDH on various commodities. So I'd like to hand the floor to Roy if you'd like to start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, William. Let me set up the presentation. Should be coming up right now. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, thanks so much for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about how AIPs, aquaculture improvement projects, can generate supply chain transparency and assurances. For the ASC, we are a global certification program. You might know us from products that you find in your supermarkets. At the moment, we have more than 1,500 certified farms all over the world. But if you look at this graph, that basically shows you global aquaculture production, you actually see that only a small fraction of the global production is certified, right? And there's this large part which is either red rated or yellow rated. There's a part which is not rated at all. So for us as a mission-driven organization, if we want to make a change, we should really look not only at this small fraction which is certified and trying to drive improvements there, but we should also really look at this improver space, right? How can we work with producers that cannot yet be certified, that may not all be certified, and realizing that there's many small producers out there for whom certification is simply not a feasible solution. But again, as a mission-driven organization, we still want to be there also for their producers, realizing that if we want to make a meaningful change, we have to evolve the way that we that we set up our support instruments in order to do so. So what you'll see from the ASC in the coming years is that outside of the fact that currently we operate certification programs, we have 12 farm standards, a feed standard, and then throughout the supply chain, a chain of custody, which ensures essentially traceability all the way up to the retailer in which you can find your ASC certified product. We will actually be evolving that role as an assurance provider, not only in certification, but also in this improver space. Realizing that not all the producers out there can or should probably be certified. So what does it mean for us? As William already alluded to, in the fishery space, FIPs, so fisheries improvement projects, are a relatively well-established tool. It's because it's been out there for a bit of a longer time, whereas in the aquaculture space for AIPs, that's not so much the case. There's a number of reasons for that. The fact that there's multiple certification schemes out there, the fact that in aquaculture, driving improvements often does not happen only at the level of the farm, but if you look at the bigger landscape, so for example, a watershed that different producers together might be impacting on, how to kind of get that organized is very challenging. And because of that, this AIP space is not so crystallized, but it is key for, I guess, the industry, the sector, not only private sector, but also NGOs and stakeholders involved to kind of get together around that concept of AIPs. We see from an ASC perspective that there are a number of retailers that actually refer in their procurement policies to sourcing either certified or products coming from an AIP. So putting support instruments in place to effectively run and administer AIPs is something that as an organization we're working on quite actively. So essentially what we've been doing as ASC is that we've developed a concept of AIPs, which is structured, as you can see here, and you don't need to look into all the details, but from a market's perspective, what the market likes about certification is that certification offers the checks and balances that allow seafood buyers and eventually consumers to buy with confidence, meaning that the product that you buy is produced against social and environmental good practices, and that there is a credible system in place that basically checks and assures that indeed that product is, the claim on that product can actually be traced back to the producer where that's coming from, right? So that there's no kind of mixing taking place in those supply chains. So it's basically these two elements, the standard on the one hand, as well as the assurance system on the other hand. Essentially, what we've been doing in this improver space is that we've been developing a similar model, a model that establishes farm performance and is able to track how farms improve over time, so that at the end of the day, they might meet certification or they are measurably better producers. And as long as producers follow the rules of this game, the framework that ASC set out, we are willing to endorse and back such claims. So for us, this AIP is really a non-competitive project that can either lead to certification. Of course, that's something that we as ASC like, but we also realize that, especially for smaller producers, other types of improvement that might not always lead to certification, because the economy of scale might be very challenging for smaller producers. Not every market accepts certification, so we actually realize that as long as we can track improved performance, then that is also the type of improvement that we can get behind. So it can lead to certification, but it's not a must from our perspective. We have set out a framework of requirements, which includes a number of basic elements around measuring baselines, implementing action plans, the reporting and verification in a public manner by a third party, so that gives a bit of credibility against a clear time frame to make sure there's no greenwashing taking place. So with those elements, that comprises for us a credible AIP that we can support. The way that ASC rolls this out is through partnering actually with like-minded partners on the implementation and verification side. Whereas the ASC may develop tools and networks, we actually see that there's a strong role for organizations that have a local capacity to support producers or producer groups to implement that type of work. And also have a third party, not an auditor, but a third party, verify the performance and progress of those AIPs, so that we can, in a credible and transparent way, report out and track AIPs over time. So essentially what we're trying to do, similar as how we work in certification, so we're really trying to push the bar on credibility, essentially through transparency on performance and progress, to basically show that farms or groups of farms can make improvements over time. And the end goal for us is to really provide the marketplace, so retailers or seafood buyers, with an assurance tool, right, which is not to the same degree as certification, but at least have a credible level of assurance to provide them with the confidence to engage with producers in an AIP, and also provided market incentive to move on. Just to give you two examples of that show a bit of the, I guess, the complexities and the nuances of different AIPs that we support. So currently, we are supporting an AIP in East Java, where we are working with 3 processing companies, and those processors, they're really key to kind of incentivize the producers that are involved to to make meaningful improvement steps, because they are the linking pin to the marketplace. A lot of the, I guess, reliance lays upon the, I guess, the confidence and the support and incentive that those processors can provide to producers to stay on track. Because for producers to engage in an AIP, they will be faced with a number of requests around starting to collect data, and the data might be reported out in a public manner, and realizing that maybe not all practices are in line with what the market may require. That could be a little bit scary, right? So having processes in place that actually support producers on the ground, that provide kind of that market access, is really key to build momentum in AIP. We work with a local NGO, YSAA, that kind of oversees this work also from a technical side. So they do the day-to-day support of the farmers. And in this AIP, there are 4 farms that are moving to ASC certification, and another 12 farms that are implementing better practices. So for them, certification is not the desired end goal, but still they want to address very specifically issues around permits and licensing, which is a challenge in this case, because certain responsibilities lay with local authorities, other responsibilities lay with a national authority, and there are some challenges in how to obtain those permits and licenses. So simply having the legality aspect in place is a challenge for farmers, and we're trying to address that by setting up a dialogue and working directly with administrators to smoothen that process. And the other thing is, and that's based upon interviews and questionnaires that we did with farmers, are challenges around water quality and disease management. And obviously there is an aspect that can partly be managed by having on-site better practices on this topic. But part of those risks associated with water quality and disease management, of course, also lay beyond the level of the farm, because of course farmers are impacting each other. So there is an element of, let's call it a landscape component there, where we're trying to work with both local authorities as well as a commercial provider to potentially set up a system which tracks and monitors water quality and potential disease risks. And that can be reported out either in a public way or directly to farmers, so they can adjust and improve their farming management based upon that. And I guess the interesting thing is that although 4 + 12 farms have registered in this AIP, they're actually all part of a bigger farming group, which is called the ASSIN group, which comprises of 180 farmers. And they, in a way, might all benefit from those improved landscape practices around licensing and water quality disease management. Just to give you a little bit of an example of the type of data that's being collected. This is for the farms that are not moving to certification. We are collecting some place-based data, farm siting, farm ownership. The fact that they're not going to certification in this AIP gives us a bit of flexibility in terms of the other type of data that we want to collect, or that they want to collect. So in terms of water quality indicators, that's still something that's under discussion at the moment. It's something that we want to link to the ASC program, but also the farmers need to be okay with how they are collecting and reporting out in a public way on data. As you'll see a bit later on, for the farms that are moving to certification, those requirements are much stricter in a sense. They'll have to collect much more data, also in order for them to be prepared for a certification audit when that's going to come in place. But as you can already see from this, quite a lot of effort goes into this data collection and verification aspect. Another example is an AIP in Bangladesh, working there directly with a German seafood buyer, which is really the driving force behind this AIP, as well as a local processor. They're the ones implementing, so they're the ones that have some technical capacity in place to support this project. And initially, we're working with 125 farmers spread over 5 clusters. And because the market requirement is really ASC certification, we're trying to implement the ASC shrimp standard there, as well as group certification requirements. In a way, this is just a kind of a startup phase, because over time, the German partner aims to scale this up to more than 1,000 farmers. Quite likely, there's going to bring quite some challenges, because some farmers are relatively small, right? So harvest sizes might be a couple of 100 kilograms. So that will bring challenges linked to the strictness of the ASC standard, as well as all the data collection requirements that it has, including group certification requirements, which will require these farmer clusters to run internal management systems that will then have to be audited by an ASC auditor at the end of the day. So that's going to be quite complex in this project. On that, it doesn't have a direct landscape component, although especially if the AIP starts scaling up, we will be working with quite a large group of farmers. So quite likely it will also lift the performance of the farmers in that region. And again, thinking about data collection already at the moment, collecting data from 125 farms, it took us a couple of months to kind of get the complete data set out there in order for us to even get started. Now talking a little bit about all these concepts, right? Transparency and traceability and assurances. I think it's good to clarify that, like for us as ASC, as a certification program, we are essentially an assurance provider, right? And assurance is, in that sense, a flexible. It's a flexible piece, because you can have that at different levels, so to say. How we work with AIPs is that we definitely try to bring a lot of data collection and transparency around data and performance at the level of the farm. As soon as the product leaves the farm, we don't offer the full supply chain assurances on AIPs as we do with certification, because for certification, it's a whole different ballgame, right? The chain of custody certification comes in place, and a whole range of additional layers of verification, additional verification tools are then added on top of certification to basically just add a number of checks and balances to have a very high level of assurance and traceability on products. We are not doing that for AIPs, partly because it is costly, and partly because we also don't want to create an AIP product which comes too close to certification, right? Because it might cannibalize on the value for the ASC logo as we see it. However, that doesn't mean we don't do any traceability or transparency at all, right? We're doing a lot of data collection around performance data at the level of the farm. We can potentially offer a number of additional verification tools, and I'll give you some examples later on, that may add kind of to the assurance that we're offering. But I'm just showing this to kind of point out that for full-on certification versus AIPs, we do kind of offer different products there in that sense. And one of the kind of additional verification levels that we do for certification on top of chain of custody, right? So on top of a physical segregation standard is what we call key data elements, KDE. And that's basically a set of data requirements that's collected throughout the supply chain. So not only at the level of the farm, but also throughout downstream supply chain actors, but also for the farm, for PL inputs, that basically allow us to do things like volume reconciliation and make sure that there's no volume inflation taking place throughout the supply chain, right? One of the challenges that you see with certified supply chains, for example, is that there's always this incentive that the market provides by having either a price premium or access to markets, that volumes get inflated. So we need to be able to track these type of volumes. And this is an example of the type of data that's collected for certified supply chains. And this is basically just a snapshot of farm level data that's being collected. I guess the total list is close to 100 indicators that we're trying to track throughout the supply chain. And it's all kind of on top of this physical segregation standard that we have. Basically, this is all an added layer of supply chain assurances that we do in certified supply chains. And these key data elements, they are aligned with the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability. Right, so that's the, I would say, the neutral standard setting body for what seafood traceability should look like. Certain elements of this will be used in AIPs. So the type of data fields that you see here are also used in the AIPs for us to generate meaningful data that can really show that farms are moving in the right direction and that we can offer some assurances for farms and AIPs. Another tool that I wanted to highlight here is trace element fingerprinting. It's not DNA testing, but essentially it's a technique that is based upon the fact that animals such as shrimp that are grown in a certain region, they reflect certain trace elements from that region, from the soil, from the groundwater, from the environment. And you can actually test or make like a profile of the product in origin, and you can match that with profiles that you take from samples in the marketplace. And those trace elements, based on the samples and the profiles that you create, can be tracked either to country or to individual water bodies to show that indeed traceability is in place and indeed the product is coming from the area where it is supposedly coming from. So this is another one of these verification layers that we are at the moment offering on top of certification. But it could be a tool that could be used also for AIPs. So summarizing, don't need to go into the detail of the slide. On the bottom, you basically see that with our current certification system, it's a pretty rigid system relying on farm certification and chain of custody and all these checks and balances that certification offers. On top of that, we have verification layers. That's the kind of the four bars that you see on top. Not all of it will be offered in AIPs because there's a cost element to that, but we'll definitely take the meaningful elements that can be used at the level of the farm, but also throughout the supply chain to increase transparency and performance of AIPs because we feel that it's really needed by the marketplace in order to engage with meaningful improvement products. So for the ASC, transparency and data-driven approaches are really key to strengthen traceability and to improve sector performance. As an organization, we're trying to be as transparent as possible in all the work that we do. So on top of the screen here, you see some screenshots of our GIS portal where we have logged all the certified farms and in the future also all the farms that are in an AIP. So you can go on a website, click on the map and find all kind of data and performance audits from different farms around the world. And of course, there's also the Find a Farm function on our website. You can click on any certified farm on the world. You find all the data from audit reports in there. Thanks so much for now. And I think I'll hand back to Elena.
Thank you, Roy. It was a really good presentation packed with information, and it's nice how you were able to draw out some of those differences between AIPs that are landscape-based, so they have that governance angle in that case, and others that are improvement projects that are helping many farms moving on, but each farm with its own individual process, basically. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to our second speaker, Cormac O'Sullivan. And for the audience, I would like to let you know that at the end of the second presentation, we're going to take questions. So there's going to be about 10 minutes for that. But now Cormac O'Sullivan has 30 years experience in the seafood industry. So it really brings to this webinar a wealth of background in many aspects of the aquaculture industry. For example, he's a senior fellow for the Global Aquaculture Science with Seafood Watch, but he also worked for several years in certification. And he worked with SGS and SCI Global, some of the biggest companies in the auditing sector. And prior to that, Cormac also worked as a farmer. He farmed salmon and trout and Arctic char in Ireland for 14 years. So thank you for being here, Cormac, to joining us from Chile. And yeah, the space is all yours. Welcome.
Thanks, Elaine, and thanks to the SFP and the Roundtable for giving me this opportunity to basically share with you what we're doing in Seafood Watch around assurance. You heard Roy speak a lot about assurance, and this is very much same kind of angle. Sorry, there, very much around the same angle about different types of assurance and the use of technology in sustainability assurance. But I suppose really just to kind of look at what sustainability assurance look like. Sustainability assurance, as we know it today, takes I suppose three forms really. It takes the form of third-party accredited certification. It takes the form of ratings programs and we'll say improver programs. Third-party accredited certification would be very much, we'll say, ASC, BAP, Global Gap. And really in terms of assurance and in terms of the audit and certification world, is about as high a level of assurance as you can get. It's, you know, it works very much on a farm level basis. It's very clearly defined scope. It can be individual farms, multi-sites, groups of farms. And then we look at ratings, the likes of the Seafood Watch ratings programs, like it will cover a species by region, by farming method. So Seafood Watch will put out regional or country level reports on the likes of, we'll say, Vietnamese farm shrimp, and very, you know, broader scope and that. And then we have the work that SFP are doing, and they have the AIP directory on their own website. So quite a significant, that's kind of what sustainability assurance looks like, we'll say, in the current landscape of what we have. I suppose really is the next question, like, is sustainability assurance available for everyone? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. As Roy has showed and would say in his slides, would say just a little under 3% of say global shrimp is ASC certified. You know, I'll show you a slide in a few minutes about, say, something quite similar to Roy's donut type slide. I think it's a great way of capturing it. But why is availability or sustainability assurance not available to everyone? And it really comes down to two kind of limiting factors. One, we would say when you look at certification, it would be complexity and cost. And I'll dive into that a little bit as well. And then ratings. And when we look at ratings, as I mentioned, are very broad. They don't recognize, like a country level report recommending, you know, either a Seafood Watch red or yellow, doesn't actually recommend, you know, doesn't recognize the really good performance that are existing in the middle. And when you look at the UN technical guidelines, and specifically again looking at, we'll say, third-party accredited certification, and we'll say, take for example shrimp, because this is probably where it's more prevalent. It quite clearly states the certification scheme should not be obstacles for small-scale farmers in terms of market access. And I suppose then the question, why is it not available? And I think the difficulty, a lot of us on these calls, I was looking at a lot of the participants would have been involved in writing standards, processes, procedures. And it's very difficult in a room to write a standard, a global standard that covers every eventuality in all types of production systems for a species. And I suppose there's none more so applicable when you look at likes of, say, shrimp. And I suppose just to hammer home the point a little bit more, when you look at salmon production, it's all intensive, with the exception of the likes of organic, which would be the minor production. But we'll say, take your conventional production of salmon, it's all intensive. The technologies are the same, the issues are the same. And the only real difference from one end of the world to the next, or from one jurisdiction to the next, is whether they're using round cages or square cages. And that's kind of the only difference when it comes to salmon. But like when you look at shrimp, you have a huge variety. You know, this is just, we'll say, taking all these different types of headings that you have within shrimp production, and top left would be extensive mixed mangrove to all intents and purposes. Enhanced fisheries, no feeding. Next one would be kind of a hand-fed one. One on the bottom left is fully lined ponds, aerators, oxygenators, automatic feeders. You know, another one would be in a warehouse in a grown-up, metropolitan area. So again, looking at salmon production, and you know, when we look at ASC's figures in salmon production, it's well over the 50%, you know, of global salmon's ASC certified. But when we look at shrimp, why? And that is one of the reasons why. And I think to kind of, I suppose, even show one last thing, just to kind of, and again, looking really at this methodology or the mechanisms of assurance, we would say, like we say with ASC and BAP and Global Gap, that we're still only at about 5% of global shrimp as third-party accredited, certified. So I suppose really what we're trying to say is that really it is quite difficult, totally acknowledge, and being in that standard setting and room process and technical advisory committees and standards oversight committees, it's quite difficult to actually create something that will cover every eventuality for all types of systems. And I think what we're sort of saying, and this is, and it's very topical this last year, and there's been a number of platforms where this has been discussed in Boston, Barcelona, and Seattle with the Gold Conference, and that different mechanisms are required. This traditional mechanism of assurance is actually the factor sometimes that prevents an industry from demonstrating sustainability. So a lot of times, especially with the mixed mangrove and the small scale production, we would see it's not that they're growing the product unsustainably or it's being unsustainably produced. It's just that they can't demonstrate it either through complexity or cost. And a lot of times, especially in the case of zero input systems, the product is being grown sustainably. If you were to go in and just do a deep dive in it against any standard, you would find that it is being grown sustainably. And what we're saying is, especially in the case of shrimp, where you have a lot of small scale and a lot of very fragmented industries, you do need different assurance mechanisms. And I'd say outside of certification ratings, like we have improver programs, which, you know, SFP have on their website. But what we're saying is we would need, and I'm not knocking that either, and I'm not knocking certification either. I think there is a space for it, but I think when you look at a certain type of production, there's a different type of model or a different type of mechanism is needed. And I think there's a lot of work done in this area already with different commodities on area-based approaches, jurisdictional-based, landscape-based. There's been a lot of papers produced by ICEAL on this. So there is a need to approach it, especially like when you're looking at, I would be involved in two projects, Southern Vietnam and one in India. And like in those two regions alone, we estimate that there's nearly coming up in 250,000 small-scale farmers. We're not going to get to them one by one. So we do need to approach an area-based or jurisdiction-based approach. I suppose just to kind of belabor the point even more, like we're very much pushing, and this is where we kind of go, verification as a word. And I suppose it's really just accredited certification is done, as I say, not knocking it, it is needed, especially for farms that are producing the likes of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 tons of shrimp. You know, you do need management meetings, you do need documented procedures, you do need risk assessments and quality management systems reviews, but that's not really fit for purpose for one-man operations, which you find with a lot of shrimp. And so therefore we're very much pushing this idea of verification, that it sits as a form of assurance alongside certification, because under the, like if you look at the word assurance, like to some people, a food safety certificate in a supermarket is a form of assurance. The product won't kill you, it doesn't have E. coli, it doesn't have salmonella, it doesn't have listeria, it's food safe, and it will, you know, you can buy it. And that, like, people have, you know, in buying power, have different, you know, levels of assurance that they want. But when we look at, again, you know, assurance in sustainability, you know, there has to be different gradations of it, because there are different gradations of production. So with that in mind, we for the last 3 years now, we've produced 2 papers, one and both are the partnership assurance model papers, and it's very much focusing on 4 kind of key principles. The 2019 paper we did with a number of stakeholders, and it focuses on kind of global standards at a local level. You know, they are brought, that you try and, whilst create a global standard, you actually have to take into consideration the local conditions. Fit for purpose verification, again, not having a mechanism or assurance mechanism that isn't actually, that is overly complex for a simplified production system. Area-based improvers is the 3rd platform we believe in, and then the 4th one is committed multi-stakeholder involvement. And what we mean by that is that, you know, especially if the market is demanding a sustainably verified product or assured product, that, well, multi-stakeholders on that supply chain should be responsible for that, especially if you're talking about small scale, where their annual income is relatively small and is not able to pay for normal mechanisms of assurance that we have. There should be multi-stakeholder involvement in that. And we have two examples of where this partnership assurance model is working, one in India and one in Vietnam, which I'll mention. So what we've actually done, and one of the pieces that we've actually looked at, that we say from the point of view of the fit for purpose piece, as I said, or fit for purpose verification, we came up with a platform called the Improvement Verification Platform. And the whole idea of this was looking at, we'll say, what costs a lot, we'll say, from a certification perspective that a small scale farmer couldn't afford, is the actual time taken on site. Accredited certification is very rigid, and it has to be for what it's actually giving a certificate for. But we'd say for the likes of a small scale farmer, what we wanted to try and do was create a system where you will have more appropriate type of mechanism of assessing the farmer. So it's a platform that has predetermined, or the questions and answers are preloaded into it. A lot of drop down menus. Excuse me. A lot of photo capture instead of describing a situation. It can work online or offline. Very little writing where possible. Works in a number of different languages, as I say. We identify areas for improvement into three broad categories, such as documentation, practice, or governance. Documentation where they don't have documents, but practice, something that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing, or governance if they are licensed to be where they're supposed to be. But we actually bring in a risk-based dynamic sampling strategy, which I'll describe in a minute, where, again, we're not going to go farm by farm, we're going to go area by area, but based on pilots, we can determine what the appropriate sample size would be for a specific area. At its most basic, the verification process is this. We bring in a planning phase, we have a pilot phase, we develop a sampling strategy based on the pilot, we then carry out assessments, and then we verify the product, basically. And that's the way, I suppose, at its most basic that it was. The verification is, I suppose, to all intents and purposes, like that certification step. The assessment phase, though, this is where we kind of turn it a little bit, is we have it up to a 3-tiered level, where we train the company and the applicants that are responsible for the farms in an area to actually conduct the assessments themselves. In other words, not trying to reduce costs where possible, where the farmers themselves can do the assessments. We then have a collaborator, if needed, in the area, so some local NGO based that would also conduct the assessments. And then we have ourselves on the ground that will actually go in and verify that last step to show that a farmer has met the Seafood Watch standard. Excuse me. One time you get a tick in your throat. We do a technical review at each one of those levels, and just to make sure that that the questions are being answered correctly and the platform is being used correctly. And then once verified, we actually go back and look at, are we doing a correct sample size for that area? Can we reduce it? Is it possible to say, okay, look, for example, I'll give you in one area where we're doing groups of farms in 50 and we're taking 8 as a sample size. Now, 8 might fit quite nicely with a lot of the square root plus 1 type sample thing, but we actually came to the 8 through doing multiple pilots and determining at what point we didn't see any new areas of or areas for improvement or non-compliance, or whatever way you want to call it. So we constantly revise the sampling strategy, because we do acknowledge that scalability is a big piece in this, and especially when you're talking about small scale and you need a lot of farms to be able to produce product or have assurance or verified assurance of product that has actually met a certain benchmark. And we also do training and assessment very much at the pilot phase as well, just to make sure that there are a full knowledge, and try and empower farmers as well to actually conduct this process. And here, I suppose, is just one of, when we talk about transparency and traceability, like here's transparency where we don't produce a certificate, but what we do is we produce a quarterly website where, as farms achieve the goal and groups of farms achieve the goal, we will actually tick them off in this area. And as you can see, this is a map of southern Vietnam, and the very bottom is Camo, and you're seeing areas shaded in green, and there's farms that have hit a Seafood Watch green. We're talking over 2,000 farms to date. we're working, the initial project was with Minfu, and we're now working with Seafresh and Cases and Amanda Seafood in another project as well, which is target of 3,000 farms. And we're actually, the concept has been proven. We're able to get to it group by group and actually verify it. But I think in terms of traceability, excuse me, all individual farms are geotagged. So like we could actually pinpoint every single farm within the group of 50 and every farm that has been assessed as part of that group. And we can actually say exactly where those farms are, even though some of them might just be individual ponds. And then we, as I say, have that risk-based sampling strategy where we continually evaluate whether this is a representative sample. And as the group reaches its desired target of green, it's then reported on the website. And I think just to be, full transparency, like there is actually, in an industry such as shrimp farming, where there are, especially in small-scale shrimp farming, it relies on traders, brokers, or buyers to actually function. Like a lot of small-scale farmers might, on some occasions might only be harvesting 5 to 10 kilos a day. It doesn't pay to actually take that to a processing plant, or it doesn't pay for a processing plant to come and collect that. So what we would typically see would be, we'd say processing plants having a number of listed, in one processor we work with has about 75 listed brokers who actually go out and buy the product from the farmers, pay the farmers for the product, but they collate that product and bring it to a collection center. Being realistic about it, a lot of times you might not get traceability back to individual farms, but you would get traceability back to a collection center and an area, which once you're using area-based approach is more realistic in terms of full traceability when it comes to small scale. What we're also building into our projects, just as a side note, is a community development fund. And this is unique as well in that what it actually is where rather than, we say, farmers paying for certification, what we're actually having is, and this is very much based on the partnership assurance model approach, where a multi-stakeholder involvement is required. We have stakeholders who have committed to saying, okay, we will pay money back into that community where these farmers are farming to develop and to help that community develop. The whole idea is that you want to foster a whole area, a whole process about, by being involved in the sustainability initiative, it does benefit a community. And we've had some success with that, namely with Seafresh, and this is something that is very early days. It hasn't rolled out just yet as to how money is spent, but again, it's trying to foster the whole idea that with transparency, traceability, and the whole sustainability initiative, that your community does benefit. The other example, as I said, I briefly mentioned here, is that we are also doing the same work in India. It's very much early days. We have an MOU with a lot of key players within the industry, as you'll see a number of their logos there, whether it's people on the ground producing, feed companies, large-scale purchasers like Highliner, Bon Appetit, Cheesecake Factory, Chicken of the Sea. So it is a project that we see a lot of buy-in, the whole partnership assurance model idea as well. But this is very much early days by comparison to where we are with the work in Vietnam. And finally, just to one last slide, this idea of verification that we're trying to promote and not certification, and again, just because it's more fit for small-scale production, is very much appeals to a lot of our business partners. And here's just a selection of our business partners that either already invested in it or are recognizing that there is this, as I say, another assurance approach that is required to be able to give the buying public some sort of assurance around traceability and just demonstrate it from the point of view of a small scale farmer. So that's that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cormac. That was great. I think it really shows how technology is opening up new opportunities. What we wanted to do in this webinar was really to make sure that people understand that there are the means and the tools out there to implement AIPs while maintaining traceability and transparency. So between Roy's presentation and your presentation, we have seen two examples of how that can be implemented and maintained. They offer very different solutions for different farmers and probably for different countries. But basically, what we want people to understand is that sourcing from farms in an improvement project does not mean that you lose traceability and transparency. that is part of it. And depending on what kind of group of farmers you're working with, there are different tools like the ones that we've just seen. So thank you very much. Right, we are taking question now. So please, if anyone would like to ask our speakers anything more on what they've presented, you can raise your hand, or you can drop a question in the chat box. And then please come forth and introduce yourself.
Hi, Elena, I'll jump in while people are putting questions together. But yeah, I was super interesting, and thank you so much. So yeah, I was a question about traceability and the levels involved. So yeah, it's really clear that that AIPs and area-based management can incorporate small farmers who may, like Cormac said, producing small amounts of product, and maybe it'd be best to collect at the collection area, or identify the collection area, or even the AIP. So yeah, so my question is, if you're again, the sense it's more appropriate to trace to the level of the area and the AIP, and I just wondered what the opinion of retailers is, because if they're used to certification, which I know it's down to a specific farm, but also bearing in mind that retailers are saying that we need to source, or we would like to source some AIPs. So I just wondered if anyone had any opinions on that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there first, Paul. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's something that when we started developing the IVP at the start, we somebody said to us, you got to bake in traceability into it first day ever, or don't bother. That's fine. You can bake in traceability into any platform, but the realities of what happens on the ground trump that. So the industry itself, you would say, again, I'm just looking, I would say, take Camo, for example. Probably 100,000 plus small scale farms. You're not going to be able to get full traceability back to every farm. But I think, I suppose it comes down to almost auditing language. What is the intent of traceability? The intent is to make sure that you're not buying something that's not what it's supposed to be. And the second thing, I suppose, does bring in an element of food safety into it. But if you are talking about low risk production systems, where, for example, again, Camo, where you're talking about extensive mixed mangrove, it's, as I say, the only input is where PLs are bought from a hatchery and put into a pond, and that's it. They're just harvested out of it months later. The risk is quite low. So I think adopting a lot of the good work that ICEAL has done through, landscape jurisdictional papers and regional based project, I think that's something that can be relied on. And I think, there is a level of confidence then that a product has been purchased then from how would you say, that is not dressed up as something else. I think where it's not acceptable is where, for the purposes of making up a certain way to a processor, that a large scale certified would bring in something that is not certified, and mix from that perspective. But when I think we keep it in context of the lower risk production systems, the systems that are locked out of traditional types of assurance like certification, I think the risk is lower if you can keep it to that area based approach.
Thanks. I was now like almost having a mini brainstorm when I was watching both your presentations, because I know that with fisheries, going towards like universal fishery ID codes, and it's on my plate to think about how that would apply to aquaculture, and of course that would involve these area-based approaches. And I was thinking, do you see a way of developing almost like a universal ID for AIPs and area-based aquaculture projects? And I'd imagine that would involve everyone here and everyone watching this webinar right now. So I think there'd be in the future sort of a need to sort of develop some universal ID for area-based approaches that people can trace, for want of a better phrase. So anyway, it was a brilliant presentation and certainly got me thinking.
Thanks. I think if I think probably what would precede that would be the actual initiatives and the agreement on the assurance initiatives. I think if you had volume, like anything, I think, you know, we've often seen where some initiative comes out, but there's not a lot of volume behind it. And then, well, at the end of the day, if it doesn't have market, you know, acceptance, or, you know, if it isn't applicable to the market because there isn't enough volume, I think, you know, then you won't drive any, you won't move the dial at all. But I think if you can turn around and say we have 2, 5, 10, 15, 20,000 farms, small scale production, we need, just like what you're talking about, a universal type of coding system around it. I think then, like, the necessity will drive the need for that. But I think it's, then I think once you have the volume, I think it's very achievable then to, like, that's a good idea about a universal type coding system around it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just look forward to continuing discussions. I'll let anyone else has a question if you would like to yeah, ask now.
I have a question. I would like to ask you both, Roy and Cormac, if you think that these new tools are going to facilitate access to global markets for small farmers. Like, I mean, do you think this is what farmers need, or is this what retailers need? And how, yeah, how does it, is it going to change the kind of product that is sourced from big retailers?
I think so. I mean, I'm positive about that in the sense that these type of tools, they could offer kind of a fit for purpose solution, right? What Cormac was alluding to, right? Realizing that certification solutions, especially for small scale farmers, are sometimes not cost efficient, but it doesn't mean that those farmers are per se negatively impacting the environment, right? A lot of them are very like low impact, low input producers. So if we kind of collectively, and I think we're testing a lot of these tools out there, right? And some might work and others we adapt over time. If some of those solutions can offer the kind of the level of verification and the level of assurance that is acceptable also to the marketplace, right? Realizing that it might not be 100% waterproof, but at the same time, if it's a low impact system, that could be an acceptable solution. No? And I think one of the key things there is also to have these type of dialogues around like, what is the type of data that we should all kind of agree upon that we collect, right? I think GDST, Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, is starting to make an effort, and at least is pushing those requirements into certifications. And I think certain elements of that are embedded in what Seafood Watch is doing, what ASC is doing in its improvers programs. And that will really help to, I guess, build scale and be able to compare things and have conversation around like what tools are working or how should we adopt our approaches.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think like we've seen it that there's, as I showed with that last slide, there's a number of our business partners that sees this as an approach. I think, you know, we've seen over the years various initiatives where it's about supply really. A lot of places would love to get their hands on more shrimp, but you know obviously there's surges and things like that, but let's say there are issues sometimes around getting access to more assured shrimp in the typical format being certification. What we've seen over the years is where every now and again an initiative happens where somebody sponsors a program of generally small scale to get into certification, but it, you know, unless it's continually being sponsored, you know, the sustainability or how it continues falls flat sometimes, you know. So I think there is that appetite there already for that, and I think we're seeing it where we say, as I say, we're having some market success with the product out of Vietnam, that it is being recognized as there is rigor behind it. It's fit for purpose. Yes, there is no certificate with it. It's not certified, but as I say, third-party accredited certification is as high a level of assurance as you can get. So, so there is that, and I think there's been a lot of platforms this last 12 months where this has been discussed, and I think there's obviously more to learn on this, and we've more to fine tune, and there's more developments, just like what Paul was talking about, you know, a global ID or something like that on it. But I think, you know, every opportunity like this, and it's great that you've posted this to actually kind of throw this out there and get other people's opinions on it and get people talking is great.
Thank you, Cormac. How many areas have you assessed so far?
We've over 2,000 farms in Vietnam done, and we're working now on that was on mixed mangrove. We're now on rice shrimp farms as well. But it's more really about putting a model that can be like that. That's what we're after, is to try and develop a model that can be replicated and taken by whoever, you know, down the line, and sort of, you know, use as just that's the goal of what we're trying to do. So it's as I say, we're doing it in India, where we've been working with a number of the feed producers there in the partnership, doing pilots on farms to try and establish what a representative sample will be. That'll differ, and that will always differ from one project to the next. But as long as you've got people on the ground, and some of them are on the call there, that are willing to work on that, you got the goodwill to keep it going. So it's slower in India, but yeah, we've over 2,000 in Vietnam today.
And Karma, how does the tool that you guys have developed, how does one uses it? Or more, if I should put it in a different way, who is your client? Is it is there a specific category? Is it importer, or is it a processing plant? Can it be anyone?
It can be anybody, as long as they have the ability to organize the farmers. That's the key thing. And like we find that the processors tend to be that. So like we started out in Vietnam with Min Food, and then, you know, the next project we have now in Vietnam is got Sea Fresh and Cases as the processor. Again, they have the ability to, processors generally have that good relationship with the small scale farmers, and you know, they have the ability and the staff and the extension agents to go out and work on those farms. So that's generally how we do it. But it's, as I say, this is only going since 2018, 2019, and we've had COVID in between. So, you know, given what we've had, like in the short space of time, we've had a lot of success with it. But we're totally, like, if somebody else wants to talk to us about it and another project, we're quite happy to sit down and talk.
Okay, great. Right, we have maybe time for one more question. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, actually, hi, Elena. This is Blake.
Hi, Blake.
Hi, Union. Quick question for either Cormac or Roy. Thanks both for the presentation. My question is around that traceability. And Cormac, you kind of alluded to this when you referenced like the need for traceability when it comes to food safety. And here in the United States, the regulatory body that oversees food safety, the FDA, has put in place a new rule around seafood traceability. Well, all food traceability, but it affects seafood traceability. And by 2025, there's going to be some pretty specific requirements as to what information needs to be passed along to importers like us, and ultimately to the retailers. And I'm not an expert on the regulation, but my understanding is that it is farm level harvest data, you know, time, location, and so forth. So I'm just kind of wondering how the platforms that you've described, particularly the IVP platform, kind of accounts for that or interacts with it, if there's a way to get that granular level data, if it is ultimately required by importers to be able to comply with the regulation.
Yeah, I suppose just to talk about the platform that we have, yeah, like again, it's just acknowledging that it's very early days in what we're doing. What I would say is, like, we did realize that we had to put in traceability into this from the word go. So every farm is geotagged, that either comes part, let's say, take the group of 50 farms. Every one of those 50 farms is geotagged. Every farm that has had an assessment is also geotagged. So we have it. We just haven't fully worked out yet how to, would say, I suppose, report that out. As I say, you know yourself, like when we say brokers come and collect, probably the only way we could sort of maybe sort of get around that is if brokers or traders were only to mix product that are involved in a project. You know, you still have that farm level. Then, you know, there are receipts even for harvest, you know, so we have all of that, but it's just, we haven't sort of as yet, because it's still very early days, worked out how we sort of report that up along, because, you know, it's as I say, it's all fairly new still, you know.
Yep. No, I get it. encourage everyone to kind of think about that piece carefully because of the requirements that are going to be placed upon the entire industry that wants to do business in the United States as a result of that regulation. It's going to be a game changer.
Yeah,
thank you.
Interesting to hear. I mean, I think from our side, that's definitely, I think, where the KDE key data elements come in. I've shown you that sheet, but I can send you the link to the kind of the type of data that's being collected for certified supply chains. As a starting point, would of course be good to, I guess, do a check on kind of what the US will be asking for in terms of data points and data being collected kind of at that farm level. But I would imagine that should be more or less in line with what the KDE at the moment does for ASC.
Yeah, it is, to my understanding, that very similar KDEs, not calling out GDST specifically by name, but very much aligned.
Okay.
Okay, guys, thank you, everyone. I'm going to have to wrap it up because we are at the end of our hour. But thank you to the speakers who have dedicated their time to being here and telling us everything about traceability and transparency. And thank you, William, the chairman of the Farm Shrimp Supply Chain Roundtable. I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. It's going to be available with the recordings and it's going to be sent out to everyone who has registered. So thank you again and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Paul. See you, Dory.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.